Hi, Ritesh.
Hello, Jennifer.
How is it going?
It's going. It's
Yeah.
a new day and lots of interesting stuff happening in the tech world.
There's so much stuff going on, and I really appreciate you taking the time as a longtime friend of Actua to spend some time talking to me today to unpack the one of those big tech pieces of news, which is the online harms bill that was tabled by the federal government this week, and which has obviously piqued the attention of all of us who care deeply about online safety, and this in fact it impacts everybody. And people know that I talk a lot about, and Actua works in the space of online safety, but not everybody follows policy, right? So I'm in Ottawa, you're a lawyer, you're in this, we're both in the worlds that policy is exciting. It was an exciting day yesterday. So that's why I just wanted to take a bit of your time to better understand it for those of us who don't work in this world all the time. So in your words, just tell us, what is the online harms bill, Bill C-63? What is it, sort of high level?
So Bill C-63, which was introduced yesterday by the Heritage Minister and the Attorney General of Canada, discusses, as you mentioned, online harms. So this is harms related there was definitely an emphasis on children, but we're
Yeah.
talking about content that is terroristic in nature, explicit in nature, hate-related content as well. And what the bill aims to do is, let's face it, the technology has outpaced the law. We're kind of
That's right.
using 20th century frameworks for 21st century problems. And what this bill tries to do is try to bring us into the 21st century by amending the criminal code. One of the big things that really piqued my interest was around the sharing of non-consensual
Images.
intimate images, right? Like that was something that was definitely needed, especially as we get into this world of artificial intelligence. So what it does is it first recognizes that there is online harm. The second thing it does is it creates a digital safety commission and an ombudsperson whose job it is to ensure that platforms are held accountable and that online content is safe. And it also creates a regime, a takedown regime, where if harmful content is found, it creates a duty. So if you come
Yeah.
across, then you have a duty to act, and that it could be taking it down within 24 hours or what is deemed reasonable. So it puts these very important measures in place to essentially bring us into the 21st century and protect our most vulnerable population.
And as you set off the start, this the government has introduced this type of legislation a couple of times before. This time was much more focused on online harms that youth are experiencing, and certainly at Actua, we're working really hard in the realm of our digital literacy programming to make sure that kids do have the skills that they need to stay safe online. So this bill talked about, things like obviously addressing violent content and addressing hate speech, addressing cyberbullying. With the way, and I understand there's lots to come, lots of unpacking to do, but how effective do you think, what's being proposed, how effective do you think that will be at tackling some of the worst of what we're seeing in terms of kids being impacted online?
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. There's one element of this being being legislation. So another thing on the enforcement of the legislation and what
Yeah.
type of, like how are we going to compel platforms to actually take things down within 24 hours? I think that there is actually a common understanding amongst platforms as well. They don't want this content on their platform for the most part, and they do want to act and they do want to take it down
Yeah.
and they do want a safer community. And what this does is it kind of holds them accountable, saying, look, you talk about community standards, you talk about keeping your platform safe and free from hate and bias. Well, now, you got to put your money where your mouth is, because if you don't act, then there's going to be significant monetary penalties that are going to be levied against you. In some cases, up to 6% of gross global revenue, which is a big,
Huge.
it's a huge number. And when we start seeing that type of money, people do act, organizations do act. Now, Jennifer, you and I have had so many conversations where, I always say the same thing, that I truly believe that the law is the floor and not the ceiling. It's the bare minimum you have to do in order to participate. And I've been in so many conversations where it's on one end, you have these organizations saying something like, oh, we're a good corporate citizen because we follow the law. And in the next breath, they tell me it's not our problem that your laws are inadequate. Um, so because they look at it as the ceiling, well, this makes it the floor. It's the bare minimum
Mm,
that you have to do in order to participate. You now have a duty to act. And from that perspective, again, we don't know what type of regulations are going to come out. We
that's
don't know
right.
how it's going to be enforced, but it's definitely a positive start. And I do think for the most part it is going to be effective.
And that I think it's a good way to categorize it, just writ large, is it's a good start. It's a critical first step. As you said, it is quite reactive in what it is requiring, right? Take it, if an image or content is inappropriate, then it must be removed within 24 hours. What kinds of do you see any proactive mechanisms in the act? We've talked about things like having to prove that you're a certain age to be on these social media sites, for example. I know that's just one aspect of online safety, but is there anything proactive in here, or what kinds of proactive things do we need to see from the platforms to protect kids?
So one element of it that I've been following very closely, and I'm really interested to see how it kind of develops and morphs as time goes on, is the fact that these platforms will have to create a digital safety plan, and that digital safety plan is going to be made publicly available. And that means that we can essentially audit these organizations and hold them accountable to ensuring that they have the appropriate mechanisms in place. I think one of the
Right.
biggest issues so far has been that when it comes to online safety and using different tools, I've used the example AI as a shield or AI as a sword, for example,
Yes.
is that when we think about safety, it can't be a checkbox exercise. It can't be something that we have a digital safety plan, check, I'm done. No, the threats are continuously evolving. Hackers, fraudsters, people with nefarious purposes are figuring out ways to exploit our most vulnerable
Yes.
populations. And you and I have had ample discussions
Mhm.
about this and what really needs to be done. So I think the fact that now these types of organizations can be held accountable again, that's kind of,
Mm.
at least we have a baseline.
Absolutely. A baseline, and I think also, a building narrative. And one of the things, you and I both talk a lot in the media about this, and you're certainly such a, respected and sought after speaker on these issues because of your ability to sort of make it very real for people. This legislation, this is a 100-page piece of legislation. What does that mean to, the parent of a child in, grade 4, and what harms they might be encountering? So, I think a part of the benefit of the Online Harms Act is that people are talking about it. They're talking about the fact that they're real threats, they're life-threatening threats. They are criminal in many cases. People can be held to account for these things. So it's all like what brought me a lot of optimism was that every news outlet was covering this. I want people to know that this is going to take a step in that direction. However, there are still other things that we need to do as parents, as educators, as thought leaders, to make sure that kids continue to empower themselves to stay safe online. What is the advice that you give to parents or teachers? Talk to me like the parent. I have 2 girls. I'm a parent. What are the things that you think parents and teachers, for that matter, need to be aware of right now, in terms of the biggest threats and how to prevent them?
This legislation is it's just another tool in the tool belt, and that is and again, this is a baseline. This is exactly where to start. But as as parents or as caregivers, especially to some of our most vulnerable, the best advice I can give you is personal usage is a precondition to comprehension. Technology is going to keep
Mm,
technology is going to keep evolving, and we're going to hear about new platforms. We're going to hear about new things that we never thought about before. A year ago, we really wouldn't have been talking about generative AI, and now we're talking about generative AI. We're talking about Soros, which is the video element of open AI that has just been introduced as well. With a couple of prompts, videos are being generated and created. So I always tell parents, I always tell educators, I always tell people that are caregivers to some of our most vulnerable populations that it is important to understand the technological landscape, especially the landscape in which children are going to be participating in. You can't protect what you don't know. So again, I'm not saying you need to go out and be on every platform. I'm not saying you need to go out and have every gadget so you understand how it works. That's not what I'm saying, but to understand what is the power of these tools, because we've seen how it could be leveraged for good. And that's exactly what we want to do. These are very powerful tools. These are great learning aids. These are great ways of staying connected and communicating. But on the dark side of it, you have the bad, which we can figure out a way to mitigate, and that's ensure, again, this comes through personal knowledge. Do you have the right parental controls on? Are you monitoring the device? Are you limiting screen time? Do you know who the friends are? Is there some sort of authentication before new apps get put on? If certain words are used, are you notified because you've put on parental filters? Those are kind of those things to mitigate the bad. And then this is where legislation comes in to essentially legislate out the evil. So let's leverage the good, mitigate the bad, and legislate out the evil. But as parents, personal usage is a precondition to comprehension.
I think that is absolutely critical. Using it yourself is the best way to understand it. It's also really, what I'm hearing that concerns me the most among parents is this notion somehow that, what kids do online is, they have more of a right to privacy than they would in real life, right? So you would never allow a stranger or a group of strangers to come into your child's bedroom and hang out with them. Like in real life, you would never do that. You would never let them go out at midnight and roam the streets and talk to whoever they want. I mean, that is essentially, if you don't monitor what your kids are doing online and you don't understand it, there's a chance that that's exactly what you're allowing. And so, we're keeping up that message. I love that this online harms bill is putting a lot of onus on the platforms and on these big companies that have the resources to be proactive and reactive on these issues. But I want to make sure that the focus remains on, the people that are interacting with kids on a daily basis and the responsibility that we have to continue to have these conversations with youth. So my last question, what are you looking for now going forward? What are the things that you're going to be looking out for in terms of more information on this act as it gets rolled out?
So it's important to understand that this is it's just been introduced. The text has just been introduced. So there is a process that happens. It will go through the first reading, second reading. There's committees that will study it. So there's going to be a lot of testimony that's going to be coming forward. I personally have had the honor of appearing twice to discuss different pieces of legislation in the House of Commons. And that's exactly what's going to happen, where you're going to get different viewpoints that are going to share whether they believe that this is a good idea or a bad idea, or components of it are good and things that need to be modified. And then you have people that are going to work through it. But once this becomes law, that's once it receives royal assent, there is a time where now regulations are going to get passed. How on earth are we going to enforce these laws? And there's a time period to get it up and running. That is what I'm going to be watching. What I'm really looking forward to. I'm looking forward to the testimony that comes. So all the witnesses that appear and the different viewpoints. You think you figure out every viewpoint, and then someone comes on and shares something, and you're like, oh, I never thought of that. So that's going to be very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how the platforms react as well. Are they going to embrace it, or is there going to be some pushback on it as well? And then once it does become law, if it becomes law, then it will be, okay, how is this going to be enforced? And what does this new digital security, this new digital safety commission actually look like? And what powers are they actually going to have? So that is kind of what I'm really looking forward to. But Jennifer, this is definitely a step in the right direction if done correctly. And for parents, The fact that it creates that duty on the platforms, the fact that there is a takedown regime now, which we previously didn't have, the fact that there is digital safety plans that can be made available if all this passes, that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this and for all the work that you're doing and the support that you give to Actua to help us take that and, put it in front of kids on the ground. It's having a huge difference for the kids that we're able to deliver this kind of cybersecurity programming to. So come back. We'll have another conversation some more conversations as this rolls out. But thanks for taking the time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.